Happy Friday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books. If you're new here, Balancing the Books is the game I play every month where I add up all of the books that I added to my TBR with all the books that I took off my TBR by reading them, DNFing them, giving them to strangers, whatever, and I try and balance those numbers. The goal is to keep getting my physical TBR smaller and smaller, but in 2020 it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. On the 1st of October I had 44 books on this book trolley here. Let's first look at the damage I did with hauling books this month. Oh, firstly, I actually have 2 from last month that I forgot to include in last month's Balancing the Books. So that technically means I cheated last month because those numbers weren't balanced, but it's fine. We're just adding them to this month. So I hauled 2 books about books. Dear Reader by Cathy Rentzenbrink and The Gifts of Reading, which is a collection of essays from loads of writers. By now, you may have seen I uploaded a video recently, my cozy reading weekend vlog, where I read a bunch of books about books. So if you watch that, you will know that I read the entirety of this one on that weekend and I absolutely loved it. Like 5 stars, what a beautiful book. Literally what a beautiful book. I recommend this one so much. I'm not a huge non-fiction reader, but this book completely won my heart. So it's Cathy Rentzenbrink's story, it's her memoir of her life and her career in books and elements of her personal life as well, some of the grief that she went through with the death of her brother and how books helped her through that journey. There is something just so magical about this book. So in that vlog you may have seen I read this book, I read extracts of this book, and I read extracts of this book, Bookworm. So 3 beautiful books about books. This was the one by far that stuck out. I've been trying to think what it is about this one that set it apart so much. It's very easy to read because it's got like short chapters, it's broken up with little sections where she recommends a bunch of books on a theme and writes her thoughts on them. And she's just so relatable in the way that she talks about these books. I think that's why this one was so amazing. It's not at all pretentious. She's clearly this amazing, intelligent, impressive woman. Like you hear about her job and she's just amazing. But the way she talks about books doesn't feel like this highbrow, I could never understand books in the same way she does. It's just enthusiasm. Like she could be a booktuber. She just genuinely loves books and loves talking about them. So you can imagine she started off as a bookseller. You can imagine she would be so good at that job, just recommending books, pushing them into people's hands. I think a unique perspective that she has is her father only learnt to read at the same time that she was learning to read. So he grew up with a very different level of education than she had. And so she always has that perspective that reading is a luxury, it's a privilege. And she then goes on in her career to work for Quick Reads and she goes into prisons and she runs literacy programs there, and I found all of that really moving. And how she talks about working with these prisoners who are kind of learning to read books for the first time was really interesting because she said that while for her, you know, reading, it's so easy for us to think reading is our whole lives. For me, definitely, reading feels like my whole life. She knew that that would actually be very off-putting and overwhelming. And so instead, she kind of pictures reading to them as just an addition to a life. Just like a happy extra that can make your life a bit better, rather than this fundamental thing that you have to be able to have in order to have a meaningful life. And I think it was that kind of stepping back and really looking at reading as just a wonderful extra to enrich your life that made it feel more accessible, I think, than some of the books that go so hard into like reading is your whole life, reading is your everything, which is often how I feel, to be honest, but I liked this approach better. So yeah, this is absolutely stunning book. It's also so gorgeous. Like I definitely think if you're planning Christmas lists and stuff, this is such a good present to give people. It's amazing. So I read that one. The Gifts of Reading, however, I only read some of the essays over that weekend, so that one is still technically on my TBR. Okay, now the ones that I actually did haul this month. So the first book that I bought, I don't have physically because I bought it on my Kindle, and that was the Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte, and I read that one. I read that one for my book club with my friends, and I hated it. I thought this book was so boring. It was a really interesting one to talk about, and I am glad that I read it because loads of reasons. I was very intrigued why Bronte doesn't have the success and fame of her sisters, and that feels unfair because while I did hate this book, I also hate Wuthering Heights and I don't love Jane Eyre. Like, I don't think that this book was less good or less worthy of attention than those more famous ones. So it was interesting to read. I also really enjoyed how feminist it was. It's considered by some people to be one of the first like explicitly feminist novels, and it really, really was. With, of course, the caveat that we talked a lot in my book club that this is very limited feminism. This is feminism that only supports and promotes women who behave a certain way, you know, certain kind of women. So it's very limited, but for its time, it is very, very interesting and fun to read an explicitly feminist novel. The premise of the book is it's about a woman who leaves her husband. He is sleeping around and he's drinking too much and he's horrible to her, and so she takes their child and she leaves him, which doesn't sound like a huge deal, but in 1892 or whatever it was written. When was it written? Should I find out? 1848 it was published. Okay, so in 1848 this was a massive deal. This was unheard of. And I kind of know a little bit about that because actually my great-grandmother scandalously left her husband. I never met my great-grandmother, but she was a woman called Mrs. Graham, which is weird because that's the name of the woman in this book. And she took my granny and left her husband who was sleeping around. And this was considered like so controversial that apparently even when my granny, who wasn't the one who'd left her husband, she was just the daughter who had been taken away by her mother, when she grew up and got married, the family, the Alton family that she married into, really disapproved because she was the daughter of a divorcee and that was really inappropriate. And that was even later on, you know, that wasn't 1848. So when The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was written, I do kind of see that context of this was huge, this was a massive deal, and to write a book where the main character is a woman who makes that kind of choice and takes her life into her own hands that way was a hugely feminist thing to do. And the book is full of feminist rants that this woman makes. That was great. But I didn't enjoy it because it was boring. And again, I can understand why. So I think that Anne Bronte probably felt trapped in that the only way she could write this story and the only way she could make this woman be sympathetic to readers who would instinctively feel very judgmental of this choice that she'd made was to make her so perfect in every other way. She's very, very pious. She's very religious, which already bores me a little bit to read about. So she felt like this very two-dimensional character who is absolutely like sin-free in every way so that you can support her leaving her husband, which makes sense in the context of the time, but for a reader in 2020, I didn't need her to be perfect. I would have liked her to be a bit more interesting. And then the same, I think, applied to her husband. He was so awful that he was just this two-dimensional character of a terrible husband so that you could have no choice but to support her leaving him. So obviously, I don't think she could have written it any other way in the time that it was written. It just means that it didn't offer that much for me as a reader now. And I just found it very boring. The next book I hauled, I actually borrowed from my friend. So again, I don't have it now anymore. I borrowed The Rivers of London by Ben Aaronovitch, and I read it and returned it. So it was on and off. And again, I hated that book. Spoiler alert, I hated a lot of the books I read in October. It was not a good reading month for me. Rivers of London I read as part of the Love-Hate Challenge that I did with Emma Tobias. It was a really fun video, both of them. We both made vlogs of us swapping recommendations, and we both kind of hated all of the things that we recommended to the other person. So watch both of those videos. I think they're quite funny, just us being like grumpy and infuriated. But yeah, I did not like Rivers of London. It is a supernatural fantasy book, so already not my thing, but I was hoping that I would like it because it's set in London, because it's supposed to be funny, because it's not like high fantasy. It's set in our real world with magical elements, which is usually a way into fantasy that I can get on board with. But unfortunately, I didn't find it funny, I didn't get the humour, and most importantly, I didn't know what was going on. I fully could not understand the plot of that book. The basic storyline should be cool. It's about a police detective who is investigating a series of crimes, which it's revealed quite early on are all supernatural, and it turns out to be a kind of Punch and Judy supernatural reenactment, which is quite cool and creepy, but it was very hard to follow what was actually happening, and I honestly could not tell you what happened at the end. But then there was this other storyline also happening, which I really just could not get on board with, which was about the rivers of London, but they're like personified rivers. So he meets these characters who are like the spirits of the rivers of London, and they're having some feud that he has to sort out. I don't know why it's his job as a police officer to sort out a feud between the rivers of London, and I didn't like it. The other book that I hauled for the Love-Hate Challenge was Dark Witch by Nora. I hauled that one on my Kindle and I read it, so it's out of here. I hated that one even more than Rivers of London. I really have nothing to say about that one at all. It was set in Ireland, it was about a family of witches, we get flashbacks to the 13th century, then we get present day, where the descendants of this dark witch now have to fight the descendants of the villain, but like I wasn't following what was going on, I didn't care, there was some romance shoehorned in there, and it was all incredibly boring. So we're just gonna skim over that one. Then I hauled this book, People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd, and I read it. And I loved it. Finally, a positive review to give. This is a really fun thriller, especially for people like me who are obsessed with social media, especially people like me who put themselves on social media publicly. Very scary and very interesting. So this is about a woman who is a mummy blogger, and there's definitely quite a lot of like tongue-in-cheek references that you will recognise real life mummy bloggers in there. So our main character is called Emmy Jackson. She is an Instagrammer who posts pictures of her life, and her whole thing is motherhood being, not perfect, and things being hard, and having grey days, and coping with bad mental health, and kind of showing you the real, honest, unfiltered truth of what motherhood is really like. That's her whole shtick, but it's a kind of really clever subversion of the usual conversation around social media we get, which is that, people post their perfect versions of their lives, and actually it doesn't look that perfect. This is kind of subverting that. So she posts this image of motherhood being really hard, and she's barely got her shit together, when actually she lives in this lovely house, she has a cleaner, she deliberately messes up the house a bit for the pictures. She just knows that that side of her life isn't relatable, and so she fakes being more relatable. So that was really, really interesting. And the perspectives we go between are her husband, who is kind of on board with the whole thing, but quite like reluctantly dragged into it. And he sort of shows us another side of their life and slowly starts to worry more and more about the lies that his wife is quite obviously telling. Then the third perspective we hear from, we don't know who it is somebody who knows a secret from Emmy's past and is set on revenge. And slowly it gets revealed what the connection between this unnamed person is to Emmy, and it's very, very dark, like really way darker than I was expecting. It gets very tense, very exciting. I think this is such a fun book. It's not out yet, this one's coming out in January, but I think there's going to be a lot of buzz about it. The only thing I will say about it is a tiny thing that won't apply to most people, but I am a massive emetophobe. And there's quite a lot of references of people being sick in here, particularly like babies, because there are a lot of babies in it, which, I didn't love, but I was okay. But there is one, I'm not going to say what it is, because if you're like me, it'll affect you as much. There is one like tiny little throwaway reference in this book that triggered my emetophobia so badly that I was literally gagging for a long time. And like, even for hours after that, or days, like the next time I pick it up, I would remember that tiny little sentence and feel really sick all over again. So that's the only thing, is that I just really wish that one line hadn't been in here, because it really significantly ruined my reading experience of this book. But that's just a very personal thing. Most people, I'm sure, would go past it and not even notice. Just if you are emetophobic, be warned. There is something in here you won't like if you're as like severely emetophobic as I am. And the haul just keeps on going. We are nowhere near done yet. I hauled Big Lies in a Small Town by Diane Chamberlain. This is a dual timeline mystery, which sounds so much fun. I ordered this one in from work for a book break video and then kept it on my TBR because I definitely need to read it. So it's set between 1940 and 2018. So in 1940 we have this woman who is commissioned to paint a mural in this like sleepy small town. The reason I had this one is because we did a book break video on books set in small towns, which isn't out yet. So spoiler, this book's going to be in it. Anyway, this woman in 1940 is commissioned to paint this mural in this small town and discovers like that the small town she's been sent to is quite dark and there's a lot of prejudice there, and being different like really works against you in this town. And then in 2018 we meet a woman who has been sent to prison for a crime she didn't commit, but she's given the option of serving the time out of prison if she takes the job of going to restore this mural. And then there's going to be like clues hidden in the mural. We'll go back and forth, find out secrets about this town through the years. I love that kind of thing. Can't wait. In fact, the next 3 books are also ones that I ordered specifically for that video. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. I'm not going to say too much about them because otherwise you won't watch the book break video. But I hauled Plainsong by Haruf, which is set in a small town in Colorado and sounds like a really moving story with a big cast of characters whose lives are all going to interconnect. And it's going to be like where this one is small towns are dark and creepy, this one I think is going to be small towns are lovely and everyone comes together. And then back to the thriller side of things, I got Girl in Snow by Danya Kakafka. I'd heard quite a lot about this one. This is about a murder of a high school girl in a small town, and again we go between 3 different perspectives of people left behind. There was a girl who was completely obsessed with her, and a boy who was completely obsessed with her, and then also the police officer, and it's all about like obsession and love. And I hauled The 12 Dates of Christmas by Jenny Bayliss. So this is not the kind of book I usually pick up. It's like a Christmas rom-com, but it just sounded so sweet. So I got this one for the book break video, and then I was like, I have to read it. I haven't read that many specifically Christmas books, and considering how much I love Christmas, and I love all Christmas movies and Christmas songs, why don't I read that many Christmas books? So Emma, Tobias and I are actually going to both read this one in December, so look out for a video coming of that. But it's basically about a girl who signs up for this like 12 Dates of Christmas app, where she gets set on 12 different Christmassy dates with 12 different men, also set in a small town where everyone's like watching everything go wrong. It's supposed to be really funny. Just sounds cute. Okay, then I hauled the book Starlight. So this one was sent to me by the booktuber Hannah Lee Kidder. I've got it on my Kindle. You will have seen in my spooky video I read a couple of the short stories before I had to cut short the challenge because of my back pain, so I will read more. These were like spooky little supernatural stories, and there were a lot in there that were like very, very short, like 1 page or 2 pages, but really like in such a small number of pages, really like hit hard and went really dark. And then there are some longer ones in there which I haven't started yet, so I'm definitely going to. So thank you to Hannah for sending me that. It was really fun. Okay, the next one I hauled, this one doesn't count on my TBR because it's not like a TBR type book, but I just wanted to show it to you anyway because it's so beautiful. I hauled Journey. So this is actually a journal. It's like a guided journal. It's by Paulo Coelho, who's the author of The Alchemist, which I haven't read, and Veronica Decides to Die, which I have read when I was a teenager and loved it. So it's like full of quotes from Paulo Coelho, from his books and speeches and stuff, and then questions. And it's something I just like, I think it looks gorgeous and I really want to do it. You kind of just go through and answer the questions that are quite deep. It's things like, what are you devoted to in your life? What people or ideas do you feel a duty to protect or uphold? And it's supposed to be like a journey of self-discovery. I feel like if you're anything like me, I just love talking about myself, and this feels like a very self-indulgent way to talk about myself and also hopefully learn some things about myself on the way. Again, another one that I think should be like a Christmassy present type book because it's beautiful. So yeah, that's not one for my TBR, it's just something that I hauled. Then I hauled Revenge by Yoko Ogawa, and I read it. This is a collection of short stories, and I'm not usually huge on short stories in general, but I loved these because these are all connected, so it kind of felt like it could be a novel in 11 little vignettes. Each story kind of gives you more context for other characters that you met in other stories, and as you go on you get more and more of these connections. Like you could draw a whole web. I think people have drawn whole webs of how everybody connects together, but sometimes it's a little bit like paranormal. So you might meet a character in another story, but it's an alternate version of that character, or it's what that character might have done if they hadn't died in the other story. So it's kind of wistful and dark and gothic and very, very eerie, some of them. It starts like gently, just kind of like sad and dark imagery, and then in the middle it was getting like very, very disturbing. And I kind of already want to read it again. I only just finished, but I feel like every time I read it, I will uncover more of these links and try and uncover more of what she's trying to tell us. You know, it felt like there was a lot of mystery in this book. So absolutely loved it. I love Yoko Ogawa. This is the 3rd of her books I've read now, and I just think her writing is amazing. They've all been very, very different from each other. This was the first one that was creepy, but I just think her writing is amazing, and so I'm going to continue my journey of reading everything she's ever written. Then I hauled When I Arrived at the Castle by Emily Carroll, which I have read. So this is a horror graphic novel, which I also read in my Spooky Reads video, so you can see more about it there. You can watch me like reading it in real time and getting very afraid because like, ooh, it's so dark. I read it twice already. It's a weird little fairy tale that's like very open for interpretation. I still don't quite know what happened in it, about a kind of half cat, half woman who shows up at a castle and meets this like vampire creature there, and she's obviously arrived for a purpose. We think she's arrived to kill her, but we don't really know how they know each other or what's going on. And even by the end you still don't really know, but along the way you've had some very disturbing pictures. It's not like gory because it's so like unreal. It's actually rather beautiful, but in a creepy ass way. Then I hauled Pine by Francine Toon. I actually think I cut this bit out of the video, I can't remember now, but during that spooky reading weekend, I went to the shop to try and buy The Good House, and they didn't have it, but I spent ages talking to the bookseller there, and he was really nice and helpful, and so he ended up selling me this, which is called Pine, and I don't really know anything about it. He just, before I even said I was looking for a horror book, I walked in, he came up to me and was like, have you read Pine? It's really good. So I was like, no, should I? What's it about? And he didn't really tell me anything about the plot. He just was like, it's new, it's great, it's a thriller, it's got like gothic elements, and so I was sold. It's described as horror tinged, which is maybe my favourite type of horror. So I bought that one. The problem is, I then brought it home and my sister came round to work with me the next day and she saw it lying on my desk and was like, ugh, I just read that book, it was awful, it was so boring. So maybe I'm gonna hate it, but I've got it for now. And then finally, they didn't have The Good House at Waterstones, so I bought it on my Kindle and I read it. And I ended up giving it like a 3-star. I was absolutely loving it at first. It was so hooked, but I think it was maybe just a tiny bit too long, and I talked quite a lot about this in my Scary Reads video, so I won't go into it all again. But yeah, overall, by the time I got to the end, I would give it like a 3. It was really fun. I'm really glad I read it, but I kind of wanted like a scarier ending, I think. Bloody hell. So that's the end of my book haul. That is 7 books that I added to my TBR this month. But now let's see how many extra books I read. Oh, hang on. That's not the end of my book haul. I didn't mention The Deep. Okay, I also hauled The Deep this month and I read it. Again, this was for my Spooky Reads video. Again, I didn't like it. This was a horror retelling of Titanic, which I thought would be really fun, and it turns out wasn't fun. And I did give quite a lot of detail to this in my Spooky Reads video. So again, I don't want to repeat myself. I'll just say it was boring. It was mostly historical fiction, just set on the Titanic, not really utilising the Titanic very well. It wasn't very scary. The spirits only kind of appeared right at the end. And it also felt, I thought, kind of disrespectful, which, as I said in the other video where I talked about it, is a ridiculous thing to say because the whole concept is disrespectful. But I think if it had been like a really over-the-top horror retelling of the Titanic, where the Titanic sank because the sea was haunted, like, that could be kind of fun and ridiculous. What I really didn't like about this one is that it's only about a very, very few first-class passengers. It's their haunting story, and then the ship goes down and we never hear about any of the other characters really. They're like seen in the background, these hundreds and hundreds of people who died in real life, these hundreds of people who died in such a horrible way, particularly the third-class passengers who are literally like locked into the sinking ship, and like their story was so peripheral to, oh, it's just a bunch of rich people being haunted. If that's the story she wants to tell, I wish she had just set it somewhere else. Just had it in a setting where it is just these rich people having their own personal little haunting story and their private boat goes down and they sink, you know, that would be fine. Setting on the Titanic felt just like wrong to me. Okay, now that's the end of my book haul. So from the books that I had previously owned before October, I only read 3, because I was mostly distracted by reading those new books that I bought. But I did read If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This was one that my Patreons voted for me to read, and I'm so glad they did because it was so good. So this one is set in South Korea, and it's about a group of women who all live in the same apartment building, and we go between 4 of their perspectives. And the main theme here is beauty standards and women's place in society and how that is so dictated by beauty or social class and how they interact with each other. I just thought it was a really, really interesting book. It's a really hard one to explain because there isn't like one plot I can tell you that's the main driving force of the novel. Each of these characters have their own stories going on, and it's more just an overall quite dark effect. It's quite sad, it's quite unsettling. I was completely hooked, even though there isn't this like big driving plot. I read it very quickly, I was very hooked in the story. All of the characters felt very, very real to me. I just loved it, I would really recommend. Then I read Akin by Emma Donoghue. This is like a very old proof copy that I have. I now need to buy a real version of it because this one, this is gross, I don't know if you can see, but I bled on it while I was reading it. I cut my finger and now I think this needs to go in the bin, sadly, because that's gross. The book though, lovely. Emma Donoghue is always amazing. I love everything she's written. What's really fun about her is that all of her books are so different from each other. So she's the author of Room, which is maybe her most famous one, which is like this very intense kind of psychological story. Then I've also read The Wonder, which is historical fiction, and then this is a very heartwarming present-day story. And she's got others. I've got another of hers on my trolley somewhere, Frog Music, which I haven't read yet. Oh, and I've also got The Pull of the Stars by her. Maybe I should have like a whole Emma Donoghue day. Anyway, we're talking about Akin. This is about an old man who has just retired and he's getting ready for a trip to Nice. He's actually French but has lived basically his whole life in the States. But he's going back for the first time to explore his family history back in Nice. But right before he's supposed to leave, he gets a call and finds that his estranged nephew who had recently died, his son, has nowhere to live because the mother has just been taken into prison for a crime that she says she didn't commit. And this boy has no family left and nowhere to live. And so he ends up taking this boy in and bringing him with him to Nice. And it's just adorable. So it's about these two very, very different characters who've had totally different lives, different privileges. Rather, one of them has had privilege, the other one has not. It's about them learning about each other, and it's sort of got all of the trappings of what could be a very, very cliche story, but isn't at all. It's completely heartwarming. It's got all of the like warm, fuzzy feelings that I wanted, but without being sickly sweet at all. It felt very real. Both of these characters felt very real. What happens felt very real. And it's also an interesting story along the way because not only are we getting their bonding story, but Noah, who is the older man, he starts uncovering all of these secrets in his family's past. So that element was also really exciting. And then finally, the last book I'm going to tell you about, I read He Started It by Samantha Downing. Now, what to say about this book? I so nearly unhauled this book last Balancing the Books. I last minute decided to keep it. I then did a video which I will link to, which was a scavenger hunt picks my next read, and this one got chosen. I had heard terrible, terrible things about it from my mum, who actually bought it for me, but then she read it herself and hated it, so told me I shouldn't bother. But then I heard really good things about it from Books and Lala, who loved it. And I just fall somewhere in between. I'm so sorry, that's so anticlimactic. It was a very fun book. It was also, I think, a pretty bad book. It's about a family, these estranged siblings who go on a road trip, and we find out they are reenacting a road trip that they already took when they were children with their grandfather. Their grandfather has now died, he set them a will, they have to do the whole road trip again, scatter his ashes at the end, and then they will inherit a lot of money. So these siblings who really don't get on or like each other at all are stuck on this road trip with their spouses as well. And as the journey goes along, we learn a lot about the original road trip and how it was a lot darker than it initially sounds. So I loved that element. I always love books that go very dark, and it had that in spades. I loved the twists and turns. We have a journal that we are getting extracts from throughout that is revealing secrets, and I thought the way that was handled was brilliant. Like, really revealed all the twists at the exact right time, so I was very surprised. I also loved the ending, and I think the ending is going to be very controversial. It is not what I expected. It is not what you usually get from a thriller, but I loved that about it. It's a bold move for the author to make, and I very much respect that she made it. I can't say anything else without giving spoilers. Eventually I will do another of my spoiling thrillers videos because I know a lot of people have said they really liked those, and I will definitely spoil this one in there because there's a lot I want to say about that ending. I know that Kayla is actually doing a spoiler video on this book because she said she was, so as soon as she's done that I will link to it and you can go and find out her thoughts on it there. So all of that positive stuff. However, from about halfway onwards, I just started to get a little bit fed up with it. The main character loved to keep reminding us that she's not the heroine, that she's a bad person, and that kind of took away some of the darkness for me. I like to be able to do that work myself. I never enjoy books where they give me too much of the character's thoughts, and I felt like she was really telling me and like hammering me over the head again and again and again with what I was supposed to be thinking about these characters and who was good and who was bad. Good and bad. So I think it had potential to be really good. I loved Samantha Downing's first book, My Lovely Wife, which was also very, very dark. So I will definitely keep reading anything she writes because I like her style and I like how brave she is at taking books to very dark places. But this one, I think overall, I would give it a 3. Maybe I even gave it a 2 on Storygraph. I can't remember. Oh my god, I'm exhausted. So here's the thing. I'm still 4 books up. I gained 7 new books on my TBR this month and I only read 3 of my pre-existing ones. So to balance the books, I'm going to have to unhaul 4 extra books. 4. That's too many. I don't want to. I've just remembered something. Somebody left me a comment recently with a suggestion that I thought was very, very interesting. They said that when it comes to this stage of balancing the books, where I have extras I need to get rid of, instead of just picking some and unhauling them, what they said I should do is pick the number that I need and then set myself a rule. I have to read those books within that next month before the next balancing the books rolls around, or at that point I would have to unhaul them. I actually think that's a really interesting idea. What do you guys think? Shall I do that instead? If we do this, here's how it would work. So I'm currently 4 books in debt. I would have to pick 4 books. I have to read those books before the end of November, or they get unhauled. Even if I do read them, they don't count in my favour for November's balancing the books, because they're actually just repaying a debt for last time. So if I read these 4 books, that wouldn't be starting off November with a happy little -4. It would be a separate thing from last month. Would that be confusing? I kind of love it. I kind of think it's genius. Here's what we're gonna do. I said I wanted an Emma Donoghue day. I have 2 Emma Donoghue books here. This is so risky though, because I don't want to unhaul either of these books. So I have to read these by the end of November, otherwise they get unhauled. I kind of love that. That's so scary though. Okay, what next? I know exactly. This book here, Family of Origin, this book, basically every time I get to this stage of balancing the books where I have to give something away, I consider giving this one away. It's a proof copy that I was sent. So when did this come out? I don't know. The book came out in July 2019. I am well past the deadline and I keep not reading it. And every time it gets to balancing the books, I get it ready to give away. I have one more look at the back and I just think, that looks so interesting and weird. It's about these siblings whose father believes that evolution was running backwards, and he has these weird evolutionary theories, but he's now died and they have to come together and try and understand his research. It sounds bizarre. I keep not picking it up because I never really feel in the mood to read that book, and yet every time I try and give it away, I last minute snatch it back because there is something about it that is so interesting. So I think that is perfect for this game. If I don't read this book by the end of November, it's a sign. I have to give it away. Okay, what next? I'm loving this game. This is another kind of similar one because this is also a proof of a book that came out in May 2019. Wow, again, I am very late with this one. This is about a married woman who starts a relationship with another man with her husband's knowledge and permission. So they're not in an open relationship before that point, I don't think. And her husband isn't necessarily loving the idea of it, but she tells him this is what she wants to do, and so he goes along with it. And it's about the dynamics of this relationship. And I think that sounds very interesting. But again, I keep not picking it up. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so that's 4 books that I have to read by the end of November. If I don't read them, I have to unhaul them. My god, the stakes are so high because some of these are books that I really, really want to read. And all the time I spend reading those books won't even count in my favour for November's balancing the books. This is genius. Why was I never doing it this way before? It's so much harder, but so much more fun. If you think this is a genius addition to balancing the books, leave me the scales emoji in the comments below so that I know this is the new way it should go. And whoever it was who left me that comment, I'm going to have to search for it and find it. But thank you so much for that suggestion, because I think that's going to change the game. Okay, I really need to get up from sitting on this floor now because this is very uncomfortable. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye!